This murder case takes us to LaPorte, Indiana, a small community about 70 miles southeast of Chicago and the county seat of LaPorte County. LaPorte, which is a French name for the door, is a typical small Midwestern town with plenty of cafes and bars, trees, and small shops. It is not regarded as a place where you would expect an awful crime to occur, but in 1993, a crime that shook the whole community occurred. Raina Reason was born on May 6, 1976, to Ben and Karen Reason in LaPorte County, Indiana. In the spring of 1993, Raina Reason, who attended LaPorte High School, was an average high school sophomore who had also played a different instrument in the school band. According to her school records, she always had good grades. She was an honor student who worked 3 jobs. Raina Reason had strong aspirations of becoming a veterinarian. Her love for pets even made her take up a job at an animal hospital. The 16-year-old seemed to have her life figured out. On Friday, March 26, 1993, it appeared to have been a normal working day for Raina Reason as she headed out at around 4 p.m. to work at Pine Lake Animal Hospital. After work, she had arranged a date with Matt Elser, her longtime boyfriend, with whom she had recently broken up. They planned on getting back together and hoped the date would be of help. At the close of work, Matt Elser, who was also a sophomore at LaPorte High School, made his way to Raina Reason's workplace to pick her up, but, to his surprise, she was nowhere to be found. Rather, the animal hospital looked deserted as the lights were off and the doors were closed. He drove by the hospital a couple of times, but he still couldn't find her or her car. Thinking she must have stopped by her house to grab a few things, Matt Elser drove to her house. On getting to Raina's house, her father, Ben, told him Raina hadn't returned home from work either. They decided to wait for her return, but around 10:30 p.m., when she still didn't come back home, they knew something was wrong and feared the worst. Raina's parents and her younger sister, Wendy, decided to go to the station to report her missing. When they got there, they were told to wait for 24 hours to file a missing person report. Ben tried to reason with the police, telling them it was unlike Raina to leave home for so long, but there was nothing the police could do until the 24-hour threshold was completed. By the next day, a search was launched for her. Her family called people they knew, including Lori, her oldest sister, to ask if they had seen her, but nobody seemed to know where she was or what had happened to Raina Reason. The Reason family put up flyers around their community, and the police made a public appeal for information that could lead to Raina's whereabouts. A lead was generated when witnesses reported that they saw Raina Reason talking with 2 men in a sedan outside of the animal hospital. They said she appeared to be arguing and quarreling with one of them. To the witnesses, it seemed like a lover's fight. The police assumed that Matt Elser was likely one of those men since they had recently broken up. They then interviewed him and discovered that he was not involved in Raina Reason's disappearance. Also, Raina's parents, who had approved of Matt Elser's relationship with their daughter, believed he had nothing to do with her disappearance. After a continuous search, by the next evening, Raina Reason's car was found with the hood up on County Road 200 East, just 9 miles from the animal hospital where she worked. At first, it looked like she may have had trouble with the car on the side of the road, but it was later discovered that the keys were in the ignition and the car started without any problems. The investigators believed that the car was staged to look like a breakdown. On searching the car, they discovered Raina Reason's purse and a man's ring. The investigators thought the ring could bring answers and wanted to know who it belonged to. Matt Elser was then questioned about the ring. He said it wasn't his, but it belonged to Jason Tibbs, Raina Reason's ex-boyfriend. Jason Tibbs and Raina Reason dated each other for 6 months while they were in the 7th grade. They broke up, and soon after, Raina started dating Matt Elser. The police interviewed Jason Tibbs, and he admitted the ring belonged to him. When asked how it got into the car, he claimed to have been doing some work on Raina's car, had taken off the ring, placed it in the car, and then forgotten about it. They further asked him what he had been doing the night Raina Reason went missing. He claimed he and some of his friends were fox hunting. Fox hunting is a game of hide and seek that uses cars. The people hiding would give clues to their location over the CB radio, and the seeker had to find them based on those clues. Police spoke with his friends, and they confirmed they were playing the game, but no one actually admitted to seeing Jason Tibbs during the game. Jason Tibbs' alibi, though not strong enough, was enough at that time to let him off the hook. The search for Raina Reason continued. Days turned to weeks and weeks into months. Eventually, 1 month after her disappearance, on April 26, 1993, a father and his teenage daughter were fishing in a rural pond just off Range Road, north of US 20 in LaPorte County. They discovered a fully clothed dead body with 2 logs across its back. The man immediately called the police, and when they arrived, they noticed that the dead body was wearing clothes similar to what Raina was wearing when she disappeared. The body was later confirmed to be the remains of Raina Reason. The coroner ruled Reason's death as a homicide, and the medical examiner determined the cause of her death to be asphyxiation, which means Raina Reason was choked and deprived of oxygen. Before her remains were discovered, the police had suspected a few persons who could have had a hand in her disappearance. Ray McCarty was one of these few suspects. He was married to Lori, Raina's oldest sister, and had been a suspect in the initial phase of the investigation but had claimed he never saw her. A lack of sufficient evidence had made the police let him go. However, after she was found, the detective received a tip saying Ray McCarty should be interviewed thoroughly, and this is because Ray McCarty had once been convicted of child molestation when he continually raped Raina Reason. He received a 3-year suspended sentence in 1991. His probation ended on May 1, 1993, just 2 months before Raina's disappearance and eventual murder. The police thought he might have truly had something to do with Raina's death, since he probably was angry at her for ratting him out for what he had done to her. A witness had also come forward to say they had seen Ray McCarty at the animal hospital where Raina Reason worked. This made the police call in Ray McCarty for another round of interviews, and this time, he admitted to having seen Raina the evening she disappeared. He explained to the police that around 5:40 p.m. on March 26, 1993, he was looking for a house for sale on Warren Street, just around the block from the animal hospital. Ray McCarty said he could see the animal hospital and Raina's car in the parking lot from the house where he was. So he went to the animal hospital, where he found Raina sweeping or mopping in the foyer. He asked her if she knew where Lori was, and she replied that she did not, and he left. When the police asked him why he had lied initially about seeing Raina, he told them that he had picked up a female hitchhiker that night and didn't want Lori to know. He said Lori was still untrusting of him after he sexually molested her sister. Ray McCarty was considered a person of interest in the case, but there was no evidence linking him to the crime, and without any other leads, the case went cold for a while. A year and a half later, Indiana police pulled over a van driven by a man named Larry Hall. They arrested him for attempted kidnapping. The police discovered newspaper clippings of Raina and a prescription bottle with the name R. Reason on it in his van. After his arrest, Larry Hall claimed to have kidnapped and killed Raina Reason. However, after investigating his claim, the police discovered he was in Kentucky when Raina Reason disappeared, and the prescription bottle was fake. Though Larry Hall was ruled out as a suspect in this case, he was later sentenced to life imprisonment for an unrelated murder. In 1998, the investigators working on the Raina Reason case decided to take another look at the men in Raina's life. Matt Elser's story was the same. It never changed, and the authorities believed he did not murder Raina. Detectives looked at Jason Tibbs' alibi of fox hunting. They concluded it was not solid enough because people playing the game were in their own vehicles and never admitted to seeing Tibbs. They also looked at Ray McCarty's profile and somehow got a search warrant to search his property. Investigators then found blood in his car and 2 handguns and a stun gun in his home. They arrested Ray and charged him right away with murder in May 1998. But while he was in jail, LaPorte County elected a new prosecutor, Robert Beckman, who decided there was not enough evidence against Ray McCarty to go to trial. Investigators were never able to determine where the blood in his car came from. Ray McCarty was said to be a hunter, so it was possible the blood in his car was an animal's blood. The charges against Ray McCarty were dropped in August 1999, and the case once again became a cold case. In February 2002, 9 years later, the case was reopened when Ricky Hammonds, who was 14 years old at the time of Raina's disappearance and murder, contacted the police to say that he had information regarding Raina Reason's case. Ricky Hammonds, who was in prison for murder, told police that he had witnessed Jason Tibbs and another man named Eric Freeman pull his sister's car into their family's pole barn. Eric Freeman was said to have been dating Ricky Hammond's sister at the time and had moved in with them to be with her. When Jason Tibbs and Eric Freeman opened the trunk, Ricky had seen a body inside, covered with a blanket and with the face exposed. At the time, he said he did not realize it was Raina Reason until after he saw her disappearance and death on the news. When asked why he never said anything before, Ricky Hammonds told the police that he did not come forward in 1993 because he had been smoking marijuana in the barn at that time and did not want to get into trouble. Detectives then called Eric Freeman at his home in South Carolina, asking him questions about Raina Reason's murder. Eric Freeman dodged every question because he did not want to be charged as an accomplice. However, in February 2013, he was called again by the police. This time, he testified after the police offered him immunity from prosecution in exchange for his honesty and cooperation in Raina Reason's murder case. He then told the police that he and Jason Tibbs had driven to the animal hospital around 6 p.m. as Raina was leaving work. Raina Reason and Jason Tibbs then got into a car driven by Eric Freeman. Tibbs, who knew Raina and Matt Elser had issues with their relationship, convinced Raina not to get back together with Matt, but with him. Raina did not like the idea of dating Jason Tibbs again. When the car pulled over on the side of the road, Raina and Jason Tibbs got out of the car, and they both got into an argument until Jason hit Raina, knocking her to the ground. He then choked her to death. Eric Freeman and Jason Tibbs then put her body into the trunk of the car. They later backed the car into a pole barn belonging to the Hammonds family. Unknowingly to them, Ricky Hammonds was hiding there and had seen everything that transpired. While at the pole barn, Eric Freeman, who was angry and scared, asked Jason Tibbs why he had killed Raina, and Tibbs' response was, "If I can't have her, nobody can." Then, Eric Freeman helped Jason Tibbs dispose of Raina's body in a pond along Range Road, where she was found. In August of 2013, police arrested Jason Tibbs and charged him with the murder of Raina Reason. On Friday, August 23, 2013, he was arraigned in court. According to court documents, Jason Tibbs had always been a person of interest early in the investigation after his ring was found in Raina Reason's car. There were also letters from Jason to Raina, taken from her bedroom, that said he would go to almost any extreme to be her boyfriend again. The prosecutor further read aloud 2 love letters Jason Tibbs had written to Raina Reason in their 7th grade. Both letters professed his love for her and expressed disappointment that they were not together. One of the letters read, "It kind of bothers me to see you tied down to one person. I'm jealous of Matt." Jason Tibbs' trial began in October 2014 and ended a month later. Throughout the trial, the defense tried discrediting Ricky Hammonds and Eric Freeman's testimonies. They focused their attention on Ray McCarty as the killer of Raina Reason, and this is because, at one point, Ray McCarty had threatened to kill Raina Reason if she reported their sexual relationship. However, the defense's theory was not believed by the jury. Jason Tibbs was found guilty of murder, and in December 2014, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison. A year later, his attorney, Scott King, appealed the murder conviction, but the Indiana Supreme Court voted against it. Following his arrest, Raina's father, Ben Reason, said in an interview, "When you murder somebody, you don't murder that person. You murder a whole family." Though her killer has been brought to justice, Raina's death seemed not to have brought closure to her family yet. In his words, Ben Reason said, "You take it a day at a time, you learn to live with it. You won't get over it, so you learn to live with it." He also expressed his hope of finding a semblance of peace. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our new channel, where we uncover captivating and chilling cold cases that will keep you on the edge of your seat. You won't want to miss the twists and turns we have in store. Let's continue. Bethany Ann Decker was born in Fredericksburg, Virginia. She was bright and hardworking, studying global and economic change at George Mason University, as well as working a full-time job. While at university, she started a relationship with an Army National Guardsman, Emil Decker. She became pregnant, and the pair married in February 2009, welcoming a baby boy soon after. Due to his job in the military, he was often deployed to Afghanistan. When her husband was away, Bethany was able to balance her responsibilities with the help of her in-laws, who would watch her son while she worked and went to school. The marital bliss was not to last, however, as while working as a waitress, she met an immigrant from Bolivia named Ronald Roldan. Before long, the two were pursuing an affair. Bethany and Emil's marital woes began to show. She moved out into an apartment on Orchard Grass Terrace in Ashburn, Virginia. Ronald moved in soon after, and the relationship proved toxic. Ronald was extremely controlling. He would contact her throughout the day, demanding she send pictures of where she was and who she was with. Bethany was trapped, and her family started thinking of ways to get her out. But by the end of the year, Bethany had become pregnant again. As she'd maintained a romantic relationship with Emil while he was on leave, the father of her child remains unclear. After returning from deployment in February, Emil and Bethany went on a holiday to Hawaii. After coming back, they stayed with Emil's parents, who were unaware of the strains on their marriage. The next morning, January 29th, Emil saw Bethany before she went back to the apartment she shared with Ronald. She called him at work to confirm what shift she would be working the following week, and Ronald says he saw her that afternoon. Emil was redeployed on February 2nd, and Bethany did not come to the airport to say goodbye. Her absence was put down to their relationship problems. This was not unusual. People could often go a few days without hearing from Bethany, as her life was a busy balancing act of parenting, school, and work. She remained active on Facebook and was still sending messages to friends. However, it was these messages that would arouse suspicion. A few of Bethany's friends contacted her mother, Kim Nelson, to explain that they had received messages from Bethany's account, but they did not believe she was the one writing them. On February 19th, Kim asked her parents to visit Bethany and Ronald's apartment to see if she was okay. They noticed that her car was still in the parking lot, but it looked abandoned, dusty with a flat tire, and parked at an awkward angle. After banging on the front door and not getting a response, panic set in. Initial inquiries gravely concerned investigators. Her bank accounts had not been touched. Her phone records showed that her phone had not been used since January. It quickly became apparent that there was a love triangle, so Emil and Ronald became the focus of the investigation. After contacting Emil, he returned home to speak to the police. Ronald explained to investigators that he thought she had simply returned to live with her parents. Police looked into Ronald's background further and discovered he had a string of previous convictions, including identity theft and destruction of property after smashing a woman's car window. He was not able to give consistent answers when questioned about when he had last seen Bethany's car parked outside. As Ronald had moved out, they obtained a warrant to search his new address. They seized phones and a laptop, but no new evidence would come of this. During this time, Emil was granted a divorce from the missing Bethany. Ronald has only ever made one public statement on the disappearance of Bethany Decker, which he made through his attorney. "My client remains hopeful and prays daily that Bethany will come home. He has complete confidence that law enforcement is working hard on the case." In the years after her disappearance, Ronald began a relationship with a woman named Vicky Willoughby. Like his relationship with Bethany Decker, it quickly became abusive and controlling. During a fight, Vicky pulled a gun on Ronald. He wrestled the weapon away from her and shot her 3 times. Vicky miraculously survived but lost an eye and would live with the emotional scars forever. No charges were filed against Ronald, as it was deemed that Vicky had acted in self-defense. He pleaded guilty to 2 felony assault charges and was sentenced to 6 to 8 years in prison. She later shared her experiences on an episode of the hit TV show Dr. Phil. In an interview with the Daily Mail, she said, "Another girl is going to get hurt by this man. It's a terrible injustice, not just for me, but for the next girl he attacks." Once Ronald has served his sentence, proceedings will begin to deport him from the United States. There is no evidence that Bethany ever gave birth to the baby she was carrying at the time of her disappearance, and no trace of her has ever been found. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Bethany Decker, please contact the relevant authorities. The mysterious circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Marcia Brantley have captured the attention of the press and public for years. Marcia Brantley was born Marcia Ellen Rader on February 28, 1959. Originally from Illinois, she was an only child, with a large extended family scattered all over the United States. Marcia was private and kept a small circle of friends. She was friendly and strong-willed with a take-charge, no-nonsense attitude. She loved animals and would foster dogs in need of homes. Her biggest passion, however, was writing. She formed a writing club, dreamed of publishing her own works, and kept a blog that detailed the ins and outs of her life. On March 31, 2000, Marcia married Donnie Brantley. In her own words, it was a day filled with joy. I was bustling around and getting ready for a wedding. My family arrived at intervals throughout the day, meals were shared, and then there was the big event itself. It was great, the happiest day of my life. These words are taken from a blog post that she wrote for their wedding anniversary in February 2009. In the same year as her wedding, tragedy would strike, as she would lose both her parents within weeks of each other to cancer. In the years that followed, she was active on her blog called Magpie's Nest, doing everything from film reviews to lamenting about the harsh Tennessee weather. Everything from film reviews to lamenting about the harsh Tennessee weather. Her blog gave an insight into her daily life with Donnie, as did her Facebook page. My wonderful husband brought me roses home at lunch, just because. In the comments, she wrote, he just does stuff like that. He's a keeper. But sometimes what we see online is not always a true representation of reality. According to her friend, Nancy Grill, who was in the writing club with Marcia, it was obvious that their relationship had underlying problems. According to Nancy, Donnie could be antisocial and didn't appear interested in the same things as Marcia. On June 2, 2009, Marcia posted to Facebook saying, "Are all the planets out of alignment? Why is everything that can go wrong going wrong for the past month?" One person commented, "Except for the roses your hubby gave you, just because." Marcia never replied. After this, no more Facebook posts were made. No blogs were published. Nobody heard from her. However, it wasn't until July or August that her absence began to show. She was often seen out walking her foster dogs, and neighbors noted they hadn't seen her do this for a while. Growing ever more concerned, a neighbor, Phyllis Dodd, went and knocked on the Brantleys' front door. When Donnie answered, she asked when Marcia had gone, saying that she hadn't been seen recently. Donnie said that she'd left him, and they were getting a divorce. Phyllis told her hairdresser, Kelly DeLude, who informed a local attorney, Jerry Hoffa, in October. He passed the information on to District Attorney General Steve Babb, and before long, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigations was involved. By this time, it was November. Investigators had little to go on. Marcia was by all accounts a private person, and nearly 5 months had passed since she'd last been seen. Donnie maintained when talking to investigators that she had left her own accord and was intending on divorcing him. But alarm bells were beginning to ring for investigators, and they became increasingly concerned for Marcia's welfare. An initial search did nothing to quell their fears. Her car remained parked at the house, her clothes were in her wardrobe, all her possessions were where she had left them. Police could find no evidence of a woman intending to leave her spouse. Friends were also adamant that she would not have left her foster dogs behind. Investigators did not believe that she'd left by choice. They found receipts showing that Donnie had purchased items that they theorized could be used to dispose of a body, including a plastic drop cloth, a welder's kit, a tarp, and a pressure washer. During their search, an unusual email came to light. Marcia had written to the members of her writing club, saying she would be, quote, "missing for some time without explanation. I'm sure we'll cross paths often, since we live in such a small town." One of her closest friends, Reggie J., said it was a big shock because when she formed this group, her one criteria was that if you want to be in the group, you can't quit without a good reason, because she wanted everyone to be committed. However, according to another friend, she had been planning on leaving the group. The friend hadn't told anyone. Marcia had said it's in confidence. Authorities could not trace the origin of the email, and some questioned if it had even been sent by Marcia. Marcia also allegedly took $110,000 that she had hidden in her home. She apparently left a note on her car saying, "Sell it. See what you can get for it." The note was not preserved as evidence by the police, and they did not believe there was any money hidden inside the home. In February 2012, the home of Marcia and Donnie Brantley was searched again, this time with the assistance of cadaver dogs. Police believed that foul play had played a role in her disappearance, but no new evidence or clues turned up. February 2013 brought a new twist to the case. Despite having no body and no trace of Marcia, law enforcement announced that they were indicting Donnie Brantley on charges of first-degree murder. The prosecution outlined two motives: infidelity and financial troubles. Donnie ran a home repair company, and after the housing market crash of 2009, he had little in the way of business. After Marcia vanished, Donnie had her power of attorney and could have signed her name to sell his assets. However, 10th Judicial District Attorney General Steve Crump said that they could find no evidence of him using her power of attorney for financial gain. While Crump said Donnie hadn't used her power of attorney, 1 month after her last known whereabouts, her signature was used to sell the home repair business. One handwriting expert said that she had signed in her own name, but the police disagreed. They requested it be sent to a second expert for examination. This second expert determined that Marcia did not write that signature. A key piece of evidence surrounded Marcia's phone. Cell phone analysis showed that incoming calls stopped on June 2, 2009. Donnie said he'd recently bought her a new phone, and she'd taken that one with her when she left. However, it would later emerge that Donnie had used that phone to contact a dating line, despite saying it was in Marcia's possession. They said he was, quote, looking for something different in his marriage, evidenced by the fact that he had also used online dating for several months. However, Donnie's attorney said he did not do this until after his wife had left. The prosecution also referred to a kiss he had shared with an ex-girlfriend before the disappearance of his wife, but the defense argued it never went any further. According to Marcia's friends, she would not have left over an affair, but would have been heartbroken and furious. They said that the emotional attachment she had to her house was strong. It had been built by her parents and was solely in her name. They argued she would have simply kicked him out rather than gone. Within about a week of Marcia's disappearance, both the prosecution and the defense stated that Donnie had allegedly hand-delivered a card to his ex-girlfriend, with whom he had shared the kiss. It read, "Things are better for me now." The prosecution argued that the timing and the contents of the card was proof that Donnie was the cause of his wife's disappearance, that he had killed her and was ready to move on. The defense rubbished those claims, saying there were no sinister undertones to the card. He merely meant he was ready to reconnect and form a friendship. They did continue to see each other for a short time after. And according to the defense, his ex-girlfriend never heard Donnie speak ill of Marcia. When talking about the receipts found during the search, the prosecution said these, along with a ticket for a landfill and Marcia's body not being found, was evidence of a premeditated, calculated murder, which in the state of Tennessee you must prove beyond a reasonable doubt to secure a conviction. The defense said the receipts were for items he would purchase as part of his home repair business. The inconsistency in Donnie's story was another key argument for the prosecution. They alleged that Donnie had changed his story several times, and the investigators said he had misled them about where their camper van was. The police said he had given different versions of events to neighbors, saying she was either living in the van or she had gone out west. The camper van was key for the prosecution, but there are conflicting reports as to where it was eventually found. One thing is certain is that Donnie had told investigators that the van was parked at a campground. However, when the police went and followed this lead, it wasn't there. The defense said this was not Donnie lying, but a miscommunication. He said that he often kept the van in a storage facility or with his parents. The police said they'd found it within his parents' farm in Georgia, and when they searched it, no trace of a crime or Marcia was found. The defense argued that investigators had used bad practice and planted seeds of bias and doubt before conducting interviews. They said that before asking neighbors for their opinion of what kind of man Donnie was, they had told them he had kept changing his story. In an interview with Bradley County Sheriff's Office, this is what Nancy Gryll had to say. "My initial feeling was that Marcia had deliberately left, and was going to go away and be that best-selling author. But the longer she was gone, and when I talked to the TBI and they told me that Donnie had told so many lies, then I began to wonder. When the police had brought in cadaver dogs in February 2012, the Judicial District under District Attorney General Steve Bebb would be hit by allegations of police misconduct and corruption. Defense lawyers said that the district had a reputation for not honoring the rights of defendants and withholding evidence. Bebb issued a defense, saying he did not know about any malpractice, and he would have put a stop to it. When looking for a viable reason for Marsha's disappearance, the defense said that her severe clinical depression could not be ignored. Her medical records highlighted mood swings, and that she had been injecting hormones to try and lessen the effects of the depression. Whilst the defense and prosecution argued back and forth, a shocking new twist came. 1 week before he was due to stand trial, the family of Marsha Brantley requested that the charges against Donnie be dropped. They said that if the case wasn't strong enough and he wasn't found guilty, Marsha would never see justice and they would be out of options. As they dropped the charges without prejudice, they could later be refiled if new evidence came to light. In October of 2016, Donnie was again indicted, this time on a second-degree murder charge. The District Attorney General would not say what new evidence, or if indeed any new had come to light. All court documents that have previously been open to the public have since been expunged, meaning there is no official court record or any evidence of any charges ever being filed against Donnie Brantley. 18 months after being indicted for a second time, it was time to select a jury. However, a new announcement came that all charges against Donnie Brantley would again be dropped. The District Attorney General said he was worried that the case would not make it as far as a jury and that it could not be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Since her last known whereabouts, no trace of Marsha Brantley has ever been found. Her social security number has not been used. No visas have been applied for, and there is no evidence that she left the United States. Her whereabouts remain unknown. Skidmore, Missouri is the setting of this tragic and disturbing story. In the interest of providing a bit of background, it's worth noting that this small town with a population of less than 400 people already had a big name when it came to crime. It became the center of a media firestorm in the early 1980s. A local man named Ken McElroy had a notorious reputation as a vicious bully. Accused of theft and rape amongst other things, he would often receive light sentences for his crimes, which angered the people of Skidmore. When leaving a local bar in 1981, he was shot dead in broad daylight in a vigilante-style execution. Despite his wife witnessing the murder, the town closed ranks and would not corroborate her version of events. And 20 years later, this refusal to talk and a stalled investigation would thrust Skidmore back into the spotlight once again. Branson Kane Perry was born on February 24, 1981. His parents divorced in late 2000, but he remained the apple of their eye, and they adored him. He graduated from Nottoway Holt High School, and soon after, began working odd jobs around the neighborhood to support himself. He was an active young man and a black belt martial artist. After the divorce of his parents, he lived with his father at 304 West Oak Street in Skidmore. April 7, 2001. Perry visited his neighbor, Jason Bierman, and while he was there, he ended up being inadvertently drugged. While under the influence, he stripped naked and ended up having sex with Bierman. It was known that Branson was gay and had had sexual encounters in the past, but he felt embarrassed and upset, and he confided in his father, Bob. Bob knew about his son's sexuality, but he was furious that his son had been taken advantage of. For days later, Branson invited a friend called Gina over to his house. Bob had been in hospital and was due home soon. Branson wanted to have the house tidy for him when he returned. At the same time, 2 unnamed men were carrying out repair works on Bob's car outside. The events of that day remain unclear. The following is an excerpt taken from a blog post made by Rebecca Clino, Branson's mother. The events of that day are fairly sketchy to me and often make no sense. I don't have a timeline of when they occurred, only sporadic comments that were made. At one point, the friend saw Branson run into the kitchen and take something out of the cabinets, then run out the back door. When he returned, she said he wouldn't tell her what he was doing and acted like nothing had happened. Later, she said she had taken a shower, and when she came out of the bathroom, she saw one of the men that was working on the car going through the cabinets in the kitchen. She said she had asked him what he was looking for. He told her nothing and went back outside. Then at approximately 3 p.m., she'd been upstairs when she heard the front porch door shut. She looked out the window and saw Branson. She asked him where he was going, and he told her he was going to put the jumper cables into the storage shed and would be right back. She never saw him again. The men that had been working on the car claimed to have never seen him. No one saw him. When Branson didn't return from outside, Gina says that she believed he had simply gotten sidetracked, so she left his house and went home. The next day, April 12th, Branson's grandmother, Joanne, stopped by the Perry residence. When she got to the house, she realized no one was home and that the door was unlocked. Over the next few days, she continued to call the house, but would get no answer. She contacted Branson's mother, and they realized that neither had spoken to him. Bob was discharged from hospital a few days later than expected, and he and his wife went to report Branson as a missing person on April 17th. County police organized a 15-mile radius search of the area surrounding Branson and Bob's home. They could find no trace of him in the fields or abandoned buildings. Police also couldn't locate the jumper cables he said he was taking to the shed. It wasn't until 2 weeks later that they were found just inside the door. For the following 6 weeks, the police interviewed at least 100 people in Skidmore in an attempt to piece together Branson's movements and generate any new leads. They spoke to his friend Gina, who was one of the last people to see Branson. She told the police that Branson had been experimenting with drugs, namely marijuana and amphetamines. This was confirmed by a member of his family, who said that he had a bottle of Valium with him on the day he disappeared. Following this lead, police began investigating other drug users who were known to Branson, but they all passed polygraph tests when they said they had not seen him. Rumors circulated that Branson was indebted to local drug dealers, but no information surrounding this came to light. Bob's first thought was that he was embarrassed by his encounter with Bierman, and as a result, had gone to Kansas City to see friends. He also assumed he could have hitchhiked, as he didn't have a working car. The investigation into what happened to Branson stalled, and nothing new would arise until February 2003. On April 10th of that year, a 59-year-old pastor and scout leader called Jack Wayne Rogers was arrested. Allegations ranged from child pornography and assault to practicing medicine without a license after he removed the genitalia of a trans woman in a hotel room in a botched gender reassignment operation. After being unable to stop her from bleeding, his victim called 911. While investigating him, they uncovered numerous posts he had made on message boards pertaining to the torture and assault of various men. One of these posts stood out to investigators. In it, he claimed to have been flagged down by a blonde male hitchhiking. He described raping, torturing, and mutilating the young man. He also claimed that the victim had been buried in a secluded area of the Ozarks. Police believed that there was a possible connection to Branson. However, Rogers denied seeing him, let alone knowing him. He said all the posts he had made were part of a fantasy and completely made up. The law enforcement were not convinced. They continued searching Rogers' house, and in his car found a turtle claw necklace, which bore a resemblance to one that Branson had owned. In April 2004, Rogers stood trial and was convicted of assault and performing an illegal surgery, for which he received a sentence of 17 years and 7 years, respectively. He also received a 30-year sentence for charges relating to child pornography, which would run concurrently. Whilst he was being sentenced, Branson's mother, Rebecca, begged and pleaded with him for information on her son's whereabouts. He maintained that he did not know Branson and was not involved in his disappearance. Afterwards, Rebecca said she no longer believed Rogers was involved. She said in a statement, "The police are not completely ruling him out, but now the investigation has turned towards Skidmore again. They have received new leads there. I suppose time has a way of unraveling secrets. I believe someone in that area knows what happened to Branson. In my heart, I don't believe this suspect is responsible. Despite the nightmare I lived through at his sentencing, I am thankful that someone with that much evil will never walk the streets again. Sadly, just 3 years after the disappearance of his son, Bob passed away in February 2004. The police and Branson's surviving family refused to give up. 8 years after he vanished, the police received what they referred to as a credible tip that Branson's remains could be in Quitman, Missouri. However, this lead, like all others, would go nowhere. To add to the tragedy, after a long fight with cancer, Rebecca Clino, Branson's mother, passed away in February 2011. The Q Center for Missing Persons founder, Monica Clayson, who was a personal friend of Rebecca, vowed to carry on the search for Branson and not give up hope. Rebecca was buried alongside an empty plot for Branson, which listed his date of death as April 11, 2001, the day he was last seen alive. Branson's case remains open, and the police and family still hope that one day, the questions surrounding Branson's disappearance will be answered. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Branson Perry, please contact the relevant authorities. CCTV often plays a vital role in investigating crimes. It can help piece together events and be a vital witness when there may be no others. In the age of CCTV, it remains a mystery how some people can seemingly vanish without a trace. With cameras picking up our every move, what happens when a CCTV trail goes cold and an investigation hits a brick wall? This is the story of the disappearance of Trevor Deely. On the August 15, 1978, Anne and Michael Deely welcomed their 5th child, a little boy named Trevor. He grew up in County Kildare and soon became an extremely intelligent and career-driven young man. He developed an aptitude for business and technology, and by his early 20s had landed a job in the IT department of the Bank of Ireland Asset Management team. Christmas party was scheduled for the December 7, 2000. Drinking began at Copperface Jack's and the Hilton before it carried on to Book Whaley's nightclub on Lower Leeson Street. 22-year-old Trevor left Book Whaley's around 3:30 a.m. He walked in the direction of the Rimwar complex where he had an apartment on Serpentine Avenue. Around 10 minutes after leaving Book Whaley's, Trevor arrived at his office and security let him in. He made a cup of tea and spoke to his colleague, Carl, who was on the night shift. Trevor checked his emails and made a strike. He left at 4:03 a.m. with his umbrella in hand and carried on foot. He rang a friend of his in County Kildare, and the friend described the voicemail as, "Hi Glenn, I missed you there. Just on my way home, all going good. I'll talk to you tomorrow." The message was regarded as innocuous by his friend, and it was deleted. CCTV footage from the bank showed a man dressed in black that was waiting outside for around 30 minutes before Trevor appeared. When he got there, Trevor and the man engaged in brief conversation, but by the time Trevor left the bank, the man in black had gone. At 4:14 a.m., CCTV captured Trevor walking past what was the AIB Bank on the corner of Bagot Street Bridge and Haddington Road, heading towards his apartment. Around 30 seconds later, a man in black takes the same route. The Gardaí believe that this is the same man that was stood outside the bank and spoke to Trevor. This footage of him at 4:14 a.m. is the last known sighting of him. Due to the heavy partying the night before, Trevor's failure to turn up at work was not considered unusual. His flatmates were away that weekend and did not know he was missing. When Trevor failed to show up on Monday, the alarm was raised. The bank called his family, and after confirming that no one had spoken with him that weekend, he was reported as a missing person. The family's take-charge approach drew praise from the Gardaí. Detective Sergeant Michael Fitzgerald, who worked the case from the beginning, said, "I've never worked a case where the family has been so proactive." His friends and family handed out thousands of leaflets, went knocking on doors, and put posters up all over Dublin. However, due to the days that had passed from his last known sighting, to him being reported missing, vital time and clues had been lost. In the weeks before his disappearance, Trevor had flown to Alaska to meet a girl that he had befriended while she was holidaying in Dublin. 2 Gardaí traveled out to Alaska to talk to her, but this proved to be another dead end. The Garda sub-aqua team scoured the River Dodder and the Grand Canal, but turned up nothing. Trevor's sister Michelle said that she called his phone a few times over the weekend he went missing, and she believes that it rang out. Dr. Philip Perry, a senior research fellow in radio and optical communications laboratory at Dublin City University, said that had Trevor's phone gone into the water, it would have died within seconds. Michelle has since stated that she is not 100% sure it rang. After 16 years and still no trace, the investigation was reopened in February. In April 2017, the CCTV footage was enhanced and released to the public. The Guardian said they believe that the man seen following Trevor was the same man from outside the bank. He remains a person of interest, and to date, no one has come forward. In August that same year, the Gardaí began searching a secluded area stretching 3 acres of a Dublin suburb, around 5 miles from where Trevor had been seen on the CCTV footage. They had received a tip that Trevor had been murdered that night by a criminal from Cromlin, County Antrim, a criminal that was well known to the Gardaí. He was involved in a prostitution and drug gang who operated in the area that Trevor was last seen. The gang had also been investigated in June 1998 for the murder of Sinead Kelly, a young prostitute who'd been stabbed to death on Grand Canal Bank. The informant said that Trevor had crossed paths with his murderer by chance, and it was simply a case of wrong place, wrong time. By September, the search had been called off. Trevor's case remains open, and as yet, unsolved. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Trevor Deely, please contact the relevant authorities. The disappearance of Marilyn Bergeron captivated Canada. Born in Quebec in 1983, she was a bright and gifted child with a love for the arts, music, and languages. Inquisitive nature meant she was fascinated by different cultures and ways of life. Her parents described friends that could be a bad influence, and she could sometimes find herself in trouble due to her recklessness. Her passion for the arts meant she graduated with a degree in media arts and technology, and she would eventually move to Montreal in February 2005. She was able to use her degree by working as a freelance editor for local stations and worked as a sales assistant in a music store. Her ultimate dream was to become a flight attendant, a job that would show her the world and everything it had to offer. However, this bright and happy young woman would soon become a frightened and paranoid one. In early 2008, she told her family she wanted to return to Quebec City, as she was too frightened and didn't feel safe being in Montreal. February 10, 2010, Marilyn leaves her apartment in Hochelaga, Maisonneuve suddenly, and by the February 16th, she's moved back home to Quebec City to be with her parents. It became clear to her family that something was deeply wrong. She appeared withdrawn and troubled. Her sister Natalie said that when questioned, Marilyn would refuse to talk and break down in tears. Marilyn denied it was financial woes, drug misuse, or relationship problems. Her mother persisted and asked if someone had assaulted her. When Marilyn went silent, she began to cry. Her mother begged her to seek the help of a psychologist and lift the emotional load that she had been carrying for so long. The day after settling back in with her family, on February 17, 2010, she told her parents she wanted to go for a walk. She wore her black coat and suede boots, took her credit card, and left. At around 11 a.m., she was spotted on CCTV trying to withdraw $60 from an ATM in Loretteville, but her card was declined. The footage shows her repeatedly looking over her shoulder as if on the lookout for something or someone. That afternoon, she went to a coffee shop, Café Depot, and paid using her card. The clerk said that she appeared agitated and eager to leave. When Marilyn didn't come home that night, her parents knew something was desperately wrong, and they reported her as a missing person to the police. Investigators traced her card to the ATM and coffee shop, and her parents scoured the city, handing out flyers in a desperate attempt to find their daughter. The story of her disappearance quickly became front-page news. Images of her circulated through different media circuits, and the investigation ramped up. When the police discovered the CCTV of the withdrawn and anxious Marilyn, they initially would not show her parents. They were concerned it would cause them too much unnecessary distress. When her parents eventually watched the footage back, they agreed that she looked helpless. Famed crime reporter Claude Poirier examined the case as part of his TV show Poirier on Queet. When standing at the same ATM, He theorized that she could have been looking at a parked car on the street, which would have been in her line of vision. Further credence is added to this argument when considering that it was a 16-mile trip from her parents' house to the coffee shop. While it was feasible that she walked as she was fit and healthy, her family argued it was more reasonable the trail quickly went cold, and all leads were dead ends. It would be 2 years before any kind of breakthrough. A man got in contact with Claude Poirier, saying that Marilyn was in Hawkesbury, Ontario, and that he'd seen her there consistently in the area for over a year. Other locals confirmed this after seeing a photograph of her. They agreed that she had been living there with a man. Marilyn's family became frustrated with the lack of progress surrounding her disappearance. The police had not considered foul play and were treating it as a disappearance and possible suicide. Her family continued making requests to have the Sûreté de Quebec, the SQ, or the Montreal police examine her case. The SQ could investigate across the province and had a formidable reputation, and the Montreal police could investigate in the city from which she fled. The request of the family to have either force take over her case were rejected, and the family expressed their frustration at a press conference in February 2017. The Quebec City Police responded to the criticism, saying they take the case seriously and have done all they can to keep the family informed of the investigation. The SQ said through a spokesperson, in this case, wherever required, the Sûreté de Quebec offered its full cooperation and support to the Quebec City Police Service. The reward to find their daughter was increased to 30,000 Canadian dollars. Their lawyer, former Justice Minister for the province, Marc Bellemare, expressed disappointment with investigators for refusing to hand over to either the SQ or the Montreal police. He also announced that a tip line had been set up in order to gather any possible leads on Marilyn's whereabouts. The family held another press conference in November where they announced that 43 sightings had been reported to the tip line. Jonathan Gaultier, who had known Marilyn in college, had reconnected with her in February 2007 while she was still in Montreal. He spoke with journalists on the December 10th. He explained that she had become increasingly fearful and reclusive in the 2 months before her disappearance. He said that when he and Marilyn were going to the same party, he was shocked by the sudden change in Marilyn's personality. She was no longer the inquisitive and positive young woman she once was. Instead, she was despondent and listened to her music in the dark. When they got to the party, her mood slightly improved. But after talking with a friend, she quickly became frightened and anxious, as if she'd been reminded of something she wanted to forget. She quickly asked to go home. When they returned to her apartment, her demeanor deteriorated rapidly, and she began to cry uncontrollably. Jonathan tried to comfort her and to get her to explain what had happened. He asked if she'd been raped or witnessed a murder. She said no, something much worse had happened. He continued to ask her what it was, but she would not say any more. She said to him, "You can't even begin to imagine what I've been through, Joe." He is quoted as saying, "I tried to get her to say what it was for 3 or 4 hours. I got the impression she did not want to put me in danger." The case of Marilyn Bergeron remains open, and since leaving the coffee shop on February 2010, no trace of Marilyn has ever been found. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Marilyn Bergeron, please contact the relevant authorities. In the 1980s, Queensville, Ontario had a handful of houses surrounding a general store, a church, a cemetery, and a playground. People's faces in the town were familiar to one another, and more often than not, many front doors were left unlocked. Parents would often allow their kids to go out of their homes to play with friends and toys as long as they were back before sunset. Due to how peaceful Queensville had been, Janet Jessup did not see a reason to rush back home on Wednesday, October 1984, to welcome her 9-year-old daughter, Christine Jessup, when school hours were over. Christine Jessup was a discoverer, a self-sufficient and imaginative kid who gladly spent hours playing in the graveyard at the back of her home. Just like her elder brother, Kenny, Christine loved baseball. She also loved her dolls, but she cherished animals the most. Christine found a companion in her dog, Freckles. She also had a pet frog named Harold, which she kept in the moist, dirt floor basement of her home. She had once slept outside alongside baby chicks so that they would not be alone overnight. On the October 3, 1984, Christine Jessup came back home from school with bubbling excitement. She was eager to show her mom and brother her outstanding records from her music class. She knew her father, Bob Jessup, would not be home because he had recently defrauded some elderly friends of the family and was serving an 18-month jail term in the Toronto East Detention Center. When Christine Jessup stepped inside her family's 2-story farmhouse, she noticed her mom and brother were not home. Christine wasn't bothered as much. She searched the change jar for a coin and then went to the store nearby to buy a pack of gum. Earlier that day, Christine Jessup had made plans to meet her friend, Leslie Chipman, at the park around 4 p.m., just across the street from the store where she bought a piece of gum. At exactly 4 p.m., as planned, Leslie Chipman went to the park and waited for Christine to show up. Meanwhile, 10 minutes past 4 p.m., Janet Jessup arrived home with her son, Kenny. She noticed Christine's red bicycle lying on its side outside the home, and its kickstand was damaged. On getting inside, they saw Christine's jacket hanging on the hook higher than what someone her height could have reached. They also noticed that the mail and newspaper had been brought inside and Christine's school bag was placed on the counter. Around 5 p.m., the sun was setting and Christine Jessup still had not come back home. This was unusual of her. A panicked Janet decided to go look for her in the areas she loved to hang out. She went to the park and the graveyard, calling out her daughter's name. She placed a call through to Christine's friends, not excluding Leslie Chipman. Leslie, however, told Janet that she had planned a park date with Christine, but she never showed up, so she went home after waiting for hours. On hearing this, Janet tried so hard not to panic, but it seemed impossible. She could feel something was wrong. She and her daughter were so close. They did everything together. Even though she gave her children freedom to some extent, she almost always knew where they were. At that point, she started regretting not making it home in time to welcome her daughter back from school. Just 20 minutes of delay was all it took for Christine, her sweet, sensitive, feisty, adorable daughter, to disappear with no trace. The day was getting dark, and Janet decided to call the York Regional Police for help. At the time, children going missing was a common case, but the cases were always solved with answers provided within 48 hours. Parental abduction or child runaway was more often than not the usual explanation for a missing child at the time, but in the case of Christine Jessup, both scenarios did not make any sense. I mean, both of her parents were accounted for, and Christine was never a type of child to run away from home. Back then, when she goes to spend the weekend with her grandparents, she would always call her family at home just to hear their voices and to say hello. In the 1980s, the York police force was small, with just one officer for every 860 residents. There were no major crimes unit. This police had never dealt with a case revolving child kidnapping or child murder. Their lack of experience was portrayed as soon as they took up the case. According to reports, when a police arrived at the Jessup's house, he removed Christine Jessup's jacket from the hook for closer inspection. Investigators were also said to have come in through the back and side doors of the house. The plastic bag used to wrap the newspaper was also thrown in the trash without being checked for fingerprints which could possibly belong to the killer. Also, the Jessup's home was not restricted as a crime scene as neighbors were seen coming in and out of the home, unintentionally touching one or two things that might have compromised any kind of crucial evidence if Christine Jessup had been abducted from her home. The police set up a search party which also included residents of Queensville to help carry out a series of random searches of the area. The search did not yield any results. Christine would not be found. It was like she vanished from the surface of the earth with no trace. Her disappearance came as a shock to the people of Queensville, who always watched out for one another. They wondered how a 9-year-old girl could simply vanish. According to Mark Johnson, one of the search party volunteers, the residents of Queensville were full of anxiety and concern. In her words, she said there is a feeling of disbelief that something like this could happen here. Due to how severe the situation was, Bob Jessup was later released from jail on humanitarian grounds. Bob and Janet then pleaded with the public to help in their daughter's return. The police knew that kidnappings are not just done randomly. They believe the abduction of Christine Jessup was perpetrated by someone who probably already had a relationship with the family. They then asked the Jessups to supply the names and numbers of those people allowed in their homes when no family member was present. One of the names submitted to the police was Calvin Hoover, the murderer of Christine Jessup. He was a close family friend who worked with Bob Jessup. A day after Christine's disappearance, Calvin Hoover's wife, Heather Hoover, quickly made her way to Queensville to comfort Janet and help the family in whatever way she could. Sergeant Raymond Bunce of the York Police had an interview with Heather. Her alibi was that she was at her workplace on the day of Christine Jessup's disappearance. When asked about the whereabouts of her husband on that day, she said Calvin Hoover had been at work too. After responding to every question thrown at her, Heather took permission to leave, telling the officer that her husband and her children were home waiting for her, and that she needed to hurry home. However, Calvin Hoover was never interviewed. Hoover was a man with dark hair, protruding front teeth, and a slim face which looked even slimmer when he wore his oversized glasses. At the time of Christine Jessup's murder, he was a 28-year-old tradesman from Scarborough who had a penchant for drinking, partying, and gambling. He had this charm that enveloped a room whenever he walked in, but he was described as a selfish person who doesn't care about others but himself. To strangers and his co-workers, he was seen as a friendly man. However, his close family and friends saw him as someone who possessed a nasty trait of revenge. Calvin Hoover met his wife, Heather, in the mid-1970s. After they got married, Calvin adopted Heather's 2 boys, and later, they had 2 more boys together. Their small home was located in a housing development just west of the Toronto Zoo. Calvin and Heather Hoover worked at Eastern Independent Telecom, a small communications firm in Markham that supplied telephone wiring for businesses all over the area. While Heather worked in the dispatch department, Calvin worked in the installations under Bob Jessup, Christine's father, who was the lead installer at the time. The mobile nature of the job gave Calvin Hoover the chance to move around whenever he wanted. Sometimes he left work for hours with no explanation. Over time, Calvin Hoover developed a friendship with Bob Jessup such that both families would often gather together for barbecues and birthday parties. Janet and Heather's bond became so strong, they found a best friend in each other. Janet had even nicknamed Heather. She jokingly called her the Goofy Newfie. Also, Heather Hoover would many a times babysit Christine Jessup, who often called her Auntie Heather. Regardless of the 50 kilometers distance between the 2 families' homes, Janet and Heather would frequently meet to catch up over a pot of tea and watch their children play. They had even had one of such visit 2 days before Christine disappeared. On the October 1st, 1984, Janet Jessup took her 2 kids, Kenny and Christine, to go visit the Hoovers. Lately, she had been exhausted, taking care of 2 children while her husband was in jail. She needed moral support and felt her friend, Heather, could give her some encouraging words. When she arrived at the Hoovers' home, Janet told Heather that she and Kenny would be going to visit Bob in jail in 2 days. It is, however, possible that Calvin Hoover overheard Janet's conversation with his wife and knew Christine would be home alone. Or maybe Heather Hoover had innocently told Calvin what Janet had said about going to visit her husband with Kenny. Either way, 2 days later, on the October 3rd, 1984, Calvin Hoover decided to do the unthinkable. The theory was that since Christine Jessup knew Calvin Hoover as a family friend, she probably entered his car without much convincing. He probably told her he was driving her to where her family was, which of course, she would have been excited about. Days went by without the Jessup's family and the police knowing that the culprit was right under their noses. The case went cold for a while, and all the Jessups did was to pray for the safe return of their daughter and sister. Christmas came, but without Christine around, the Jessup's house didn't feel like celebrating. No Christmas tree, and Kenny only got few presents. By the time it was December 31st, 1984, 3 months later, while people prepared to enter into the new year, in the village of Sunderland, just 56 kilometers east of Queensville, a man named Fred Patterson and his 2 daughters had gone looking for their dog on the large, wooded property next to their house. A while later, Patterson could spot something unfamiliar that looked like a heap of garbage beside a half-dug pit. On getting closer, he realized with horror that it was a badly decomposed corpse of a little girl. The corpse had suffered deep multiple stab wounds to the chest, and these, according to the medical examiner, were later determined to be the official cause of death. The body wore a beige turtleneck sweater with a blue pullover and a blouse with missing buttons. Close to the body's right foot was a pair of little girl's panties. A recorder which had the name Christine Jessup written on it was also found laying in a tall grass. When Christine's family heard the sad news, they became inconsolable. Their painful waiting and wondering had come to an end, but now there is a lifetime of mourning ahead. Since Christine's body was found in Durham region, the case was transferred from the York Police to the Durham Regional Police, where Inspector Robert Brown then began handling the case. Questions such as why Christine's body was found in Sunderland bugged the police. Sunderland was all country roads, farmland and forests, which was not really far or close from Queensville. The police was not aware that Calvin Hoover must have chosen that area to commit his atrocities because of his familiarity with the area. He was said to have had a school friend who lived just a few kilometers away from the crime scene. Calvin and his friend would often meet to go kayaking and backcountry camping. Calvin already knew the area like the palm of his hands. He chose to take Christine few meters into the dense forest where he would not be interrupted or seen by passing motorists. Inspector Brown worked day and night on the case. He divided his detectives into two teams. They worked tirelessly to find the culprit. They followed all leads except the accumulated boxes of notes containing leads from the York Regional Police investigation. This box had a notebook in which the name and address of Calvin Hoover was written, but investigators from the Durham Regional Police disregarded the work of the York Regional Police, saying their efforts to the case was amateurish and a waste of time. They, however, followed all other leads like the family friend who had uttered strange dark sayings, a kid in the neighborhood who always carried a knife, and even Jane Jessup, but none of these leads gave the answers they wanted. During the investigation, Calvin Hoover's name never came up. On the February 14, 1985, Fitz and Shep, who were detectives in one of the teams assigned to the case, visited Christine's family and asked for another list of suspects, people they think could have harmed their daughter. The Jessups, however, could not easily name anyone, but the detectives pressed harder. Just over the fence of their home lived a tight-knit family called the Morans. They had a 25-year-old young boy named Guy Paul. He was kind and respectful and had no criminal record. Guy Paul was never one to drink or smoke. The only law violations he had were only a couple of speeding tickets. However, Janet recollected that Guy Paul did not participate in the search for Christine Jessup when almost everyone in Queensville had. Guy Paul, who played the clarinet and kept honeybees, was regarded as a weird type of guy by the detectives. The Morans were practically good with handiworks. They possessed the ability to repair just about anything. Alphonse Morin, the father of the house, a retired engineer, an army veteran and a college instructor, preferred to repair anything that gets faulty in their home by himself, most times with the help of his 6 children. The Morans were considered kind and trustworthy neighbors. In fact, few weeks before Christine Jessup went missing, Janet Jessup had asked them if she could list their name and address as a school emergency contact for Christine, to which Alphonse Morans happily agreed. Guy Paul Morin was the second youngest of the Morans' children. He possessed the same intelligence as his father. Alphonse taught Guy Paul to weld when he was just 10 years of age. He would often ask his son to assemble some mechanical clocks he had intentionally scattered. They often worked together fixing cars at their backyard. Guy Paul was a young man who loved woodworking, unraveling puzzle-like problems that required patience and focus. He possessed a photographic memory. He often retained the serial numbers of his favorite possessions in case they got stolen. By the time Christine Jessup went missing, Guy Paul was in 3 bands, he loved music and was a prodigy on the clarinet. On February 22, 1985, Detectives Fitz and Shep went over to the Morans and engaged Guy Paul in a conversation. He was invited into their car for a casual chat. Guy Paul was asked how well he knew Christine Jessup. He said he did not know her that well. He said there was a huge age gap between the both of them. Christine was more than 16 years his junior, so they never had much cause for interaction. He claimed to have once helped her catch Freckles, her dog, who was running loose. He also recalled talking about gardening to her. And the last interaction he ever had with the Jessups was when he had gone over to help relight the pilot on their furnace. The investigators questioned him about his whereabouts on the day Christine disappeared. Moran said he had been at work, a furniture manufacturing facility at Steeles and Weston, 57 kilometers to the south. However, detectives Fitz and Shep later discovered that Guy Paul had left work early around 3:32 p.m. That meant he could have returned home no earlier than 4:14 p.m., which appeared to be too late to kidnap Christine Jessup before Janet and Kenny got home at 4:10 p.m. They further asked him why he never helped with the search for Christine. Guy Paul Moran said that if Christine's family had asked him, he would have gladly joined in the search, but at the time, he and his father were installing weeping tile around the home's foundation. Guy Paul's explanation made sense and his alibi was rock solid, but Fitz and Shep saw him as a suspect who was guilty. The detectives further engaged Guy Paul in a playfully conversation, asking him what he thought about Christine Jessup. Guy Paul Moran described her as sweet and innocent. However, he innocently added the statement, but they sometimes grow up to be corrupt, which in a general sense, he is right. As girls become adults, they lose their childlike innocence. But to the detectives, Guy Paul had an evil motive to tarnish Christine's innocence. After their conversation, Guy Paul went home and continued with his normal life. In days and weeks following Christine Jessup's murder, Calvin Hoover kept his mouth shut. He had the guts to also show up for Christine's funeral and wake, blending with the crowd and offering his condolences to the family. Calvin Hoover was detectives' worst nightmare. He had no criminal background and did not show any form of perverseness. He was not loud or boastful. He made sure he did not draw attention to himself. He seemed careful enough not to have been seen picking up Christine Jessup after school, but at the same time, Calvin Hoover perpetrated his crime in a hurry that he had left a trail of leads. His semen was on Christine's panties, and a single dark hair was found in her necklace. The hair strand was taken to the forensic for testing, but with the intention of finding a match to Guy Paul's DNA. Guy Paul Moran, who had gone to his jazz group for rehearsals, was told that the band leader's daughter, accompanied by her friend and classmate, who happened to be an undercover police officer, was doing a cosmetics class project on hair analysis. She asked people in the jazz group if they would not mind her plucking a few strands of everyone's hair. Guy Paul Moran, who loved her eyes, did not even mind at all. She plucked everyone's hair but later discarded them except for Moran's. The undercover police then handed over Moran's hair to her colleagues Fitz and Shep, who took it to the Center of Forensic Sciences for DNA testing. The forensic scientist never really engaged in any DNA testing. She only microscopically compared the hair color from Christine's necklace to Moran's and concluded that the match was consistent. This was all Detective Shep, and Fitz needs to arrest the wrong guy. In the evening of April 22, 1985, Guy Paul Moran was on his way to band practice when he saw police flashing lights in his rearview mirror. He thought he was being pulled over because he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. He did not have an idea that 14 other police officers were around the area. 2 cops approached his car, and he was surprised to recognize the detectives he had spoken to about Christine Jessup's weeks before. Thinking it was nothing to stress about, he greeted them, "What's up, guys?" In response, Fitz and Shep told him they were arresting him for the murder of Christine Jessup. A baffled Moran exclaimed, "What? You're joking." Unfortunately, they were not. The police then took Moran to their headquarters, where, on his way to the interrogation room, he sighted a familiar face belonging to the woman who had plucked his hair at band practice, lying about cosmetic analysis on their hairs. At that point, Guy Paul Moran knew he had made an honest mistake, and he was about to face the full wrath of the law for something he knew nothing about. Meanwhile, Calvin Hoover, who must have been following the news regarding Christine's death, picked up the newspaper 2 days after Moran's arrest to see the headline, "Musician who lived next door charged with Christine Jessup murder." I bet at that point, he was relieved to see that the search for the real killer would stop for a while or even forever. His wife, Heather Hoover, who had kept a photo of Christine that the little girl had given her, often visited her at the cemetery. During her visit, Calvin would stay by her side, giving out words of comfort as she mourned. After Moran's arrest, Bob and Janet Jessup were shocked by the news that their daughter's killer had been just over the fence of their home. In an interview with the media, Janet said, "Last summer, they came over and gave us honey from their bees. They were so good to us, that's why it's such a shock." For detectives Fitz and Shep, The easy part of finding a suspect was done. The difficult part was finding strong evidence that could convict Guy Paul Moran for Christine Jessup's murder. They reviewed Moran's rock-solid alibi and concluded that he couldn't have traveled the 57 kilometers from work to his home in time to kidnap Christine Jessup before Janet and Kenny arrived home at 4:10 p.m. They then retraced Janet and Kenny's route on the day Christine went missing and suggested that Janet must have forgotten the exact time she came home. Janet, however, denied forgetting because she immediately looked at the wall clock when she walked into the house. As time went by, the detective's constant pressure eventually made her review her timing. She then said she returned home around 4:35 p.m. At trial, the prosecutor tabled flimsy evidence just to crown Guy Paul Moran as the murderer he is not. A cigarette, but that was found next to Christine's body, was almost presented as an evidence until investigators realized that Moran never smoked. The Moran family, however, told the court that their son had not arrived home on the day Christine went missing until 5:30 p.m., and that was because he had stopped for groceries and gas after work. But a psychologist who interviewed the Moran family testified that they were a part of a secretive, protective, pathological family system. The police planted an undercover police sergeant named Gordon Hobbs in Moran's cell. He came back to court days later with untrue stories. He said Moran had made stabbing motions toward his own chest, demonstrating the way he had killed Christine Jessup. As if that wasn't enough, Gordon Hobbs also allegedly said that Moran had confessed by saying that he would red rum the innocent. According to Moran, this story was horribly twisted. He said Hobbs had asked him what his favorite movie was, and he had told him about the 1980 horror film named The Shining, in which a little boy repeatedly croaks red rum in the scariest scene of the movie. Red rum is the backwards spelling of murder. Since Moran couldn't remember the title of the movie at the time, he referenced red rum instead. This allegation appeared to seal the fate of Moran to the extent that his lawyer was afraid they would lose the case. After the first trial phase, he was declared not guilty, but, with no other suspect and the people of Queensville being afraid for their children's life, the verdict was appealed and he was then scheduled for another trial. This time, Moran, who was then 32 years, was however sentenced to life in prison. The judge asked him if he had any comment. Moran repeated the same thing he had been saying since the day he was arrested on the way to his band practice. In his words, Moran said, "I am not guilty of this crime. It's a travesty of justice what's happened today. I'm appealing." Moran was however handcuffed and taken to the Elgin Middlesex Detention Center in London, where he stayed for a while until he was brought to the federal prison. During the time Guy Paul Moran was given a life sentence, Calvin Hoover and his family lived in a 2-story home in Oshawa and were slowly drowning in debt. In the year 1991, Calvin Hoover had declared bankruptcy, owing $28,000 against assets of just $11,000 aside this. He battled different diseases which included undiagnosed bipolar disorder, depression, and panic attacks. He would often use alcohol and drugs for temporarily relief. While Guy Paul Moran was imprisoned, other inmates saw him as the bigger sinner compared to all of them because he was convicted of child rape and murder, and they all wanted to deal with him for such convictions. Luckily for him, the most feared inmate had listened to his story and believed he was innocent. He then told other inmates not to lay their hands on Moran. Even at that, his life was still in danger. He was getting threats from every corner of the prison. He could not go anywhere without the most powerful inmates. Moran passed time in prison reading geography books that made him imagine he was traveling around the world and not stuck in one position. In 1993, while some people believed he committed the crime, majority of the people in Ontario believed he was innocent and should be freed on bail. Moran had a glimmer of hope again. He then hired a new lawyer, James Lockyer, and a co-counsel, Joanne McLean. Moran was granted bail in February 1993 after his lawyer successfully filed for appeal. At that point, Moran had spent 2.5 years in courtrooms and almost 18 months locked away in 6 different facilities. His parents, Alphonse and Ida Moran, had mortgaged their home many times in order to keep up with their son's legal bills, which amounted to roughly $500,000. Guy Paul Moran's appeal was set to begin in January of 1995. His lawyers went over his previous trials, and at a point, they became aware of the significant breakthroughs in DNA. All evidence gathered from Christine's crime scene were tested again. Christine's panties alongside Moran's DNA were sent to a forensic lab. Few days before the trial, There was news from the lab saying the semen on Christine's panties does not match Guy Paul Moran's DNA. 3 days later, after this was confirmed, Moran was proven innocent and set free. All charges against him were dropped and his criminal record wiped. Guy Paul Moran was given a sum of $1,200,000 in settlement by the Ontario government. He could have gotten more if he had pursued a trial, but he had been in enough courtrooms and knew how slow the system is. It would have taken him years to receive a settlement. Besides, his father's health was deteriorating. However, even after his innocence was proven, the public still saw Guy Paul Moran as a murderer since the killer of Christine Jessup was still on the loose. Calvin Hoover, who was always an alcoholic, would lie to his family about going to work only to frequent the local pubs when he heard the news that Guy Paul Moran had been discharged and acquitted. On learning that it was the science of DNA that proved Moran innocent, Calvin became even more terrified and must have regretted not going back to bury Christine Jessup before she was found, since he had been so careless at the crime scene, leaving incriminating evidence behind. He knew it was only a matter of time before they come knocking at his door. By 1996, Calvin Hoover and his family had moved to a low-rent housing complex in Ajax. Their marriage was threatening to break up. At this point, the Hoovers were no longer in contact with Bob and Janet Jessup, who had divorced. Calvin Hoover got deep into gambling and doing drugs. One night, he had gotten drunk and had crashed his truck. He was charged with a DUI and his license was confiscated for a year. This was the last straw for Heather Hoover, who soon divorced him. Calvin Hoover continued chasing work, women, gambling, and drugs. He had a strong relationship with his co-worker from Burlington named Joan Rocca. They both shared a likeness for gambling and had strong connection. In February 2003, they got married in Las Vegas. However, his happiness was short-lived as Joan died of natural causes in February 2009, not having the opportunity to know what kind of monster her husband was. Calvin Hoover was haunted by so many demons. He had sleepless nights, tortured thoughts, depressive episodes, and panic attacks. It was too much that he attempted to end it all in 2014. He tried committing suicide by motor vehicle, but he survived it. Steve Smith, a Toronto police detective, was a 13-year-old kid in 1984 when Christine Jessup was murdered. Smith, who grew up in Hamilton, playing all sort of games with his best friends, could remember when Christine Jessup went missing, and after many years, he still couldn't get his mind off the case. In the year 1996, he joined the Toronto police and had since then helped solve some of the worst cases in the country. When Smith was transferred to the homicides department in February 2019, he quickly showed interest in cold cases. In his words, he said, "These families have waited so long for answers." Since the Durham police had flawed the Christine Jessup's case, it was transferred to the Toronto police. Smith brought in more staff to assist with the case. They followed so many leads and struck out lists of 300 people through DNA. Nothing worked. However, in May 2019, Smith heard about a 2-week forensic genealogy seminar being held at the Ontario Police College. Smith did not know much about forensic genealogy, but he knew the process was successfully used a year earlier to solve a case. Before now, the process of forensic genealogy had never been tested in Canada, but when Smith received authorization from Toronto Police to try out genetic testing on a cold case, he opted for the Christine Jessup's case. Smith then submitted the DNA from Christine's underwear to Othram Inc., a Texas-based genetic testing firm, which generated a profile and uploaded it to a database called GEDmatch. They began fleshing out a family tree to narrow down the suspect. This process was time and money consuming, but Detective Smith never gave up. After turning a family maze into a family tree of 33,000 descendants, the genealogist was however able to pinpoint Calvin Hoover as the owner of the sperm on Christine's underwear. Smith could not recognize the name. He went through Christine's case file and saw that he was never mentioned as a suspect. Hoover knew the Jessup's family so well and often had access to their homes, but the police never interviewed him for over 3 decades. Smith typed Calvin Hoover's name into 2 different police databases called CPIC and Versadex to figure out where he lived and whether he had a criminal record. However, Detective Steve Smith soon learned that Calvin Hoover had died in February 2015. 4 years before Steve Smith joined the homicide department, Calvin Hoover, who lived outside of Port Hope in a small bungalow with one of his sons, was a sad, anxious, isolated man. At a point, his doctor had prescribed him a depressant called clonazepam for his anxiety and panic attacks, but it never worked. According to one of his sons, Calvin Hoover had said the pills were messing with his head. One day, the son who lived with him went out to a wedding. Hoover, who was home alone, opened a bottle of red wine, stepped into the garage, sealed the door with tape, put headphones over his ears and switched on the generator, allowing carbon monoxide fill up the garage. When his son arrived, he found his father slumped dead over the lawn chair where he sat with an open bottle of his sedatives. In the bathroom of the main bedroom, his family discovered a yellow sticky note against the mirror, with the words, "Hope you all have a good life." Calvin Hoover decided to be a coward to end it all without using his final moment to confess his crime and exonerate Guy Paul Morin once and for all. He did not even think of giving his former friends, Bob and Janet Jessup, a peaceful end to their mystery. He took the secret to his grave. Detective Steve Smith was heartbroken when he discovered Hoover died 4 years earlier. It meant he would never face the consequences for his evil act. In order to conclusively determine if Calvin Hoover was the killer of Christine Jessup, Smith and his team went to the coroner's office where Calvin Hoover's blood samples had been retrieved after his death. DNA from the blood samples was then tested for a match to the DNA on Christine Jessup's underwear. The results came out a match. Finally, after 36 years, detectives were able to deliver the news of who killed Christine Jessup to her family and friends. Heather Hoover, on hearing the news about her ex-husband's evil act, said 10 years, "He didn't show shit. He didn't show nothing. How does somebody do that? He watched me go to her gravesite for 10 years. I didn't know this man." Janet Jessup said she was relieved, but she wished her daughter could have lived. Kenny Jessup, Christine's brother, said, "Relief that we finally have the answer we waited for. Angry about who it is, frustrated, sad. Like anything in this case, it couldn't be a simple answer. It had to be someone we knew well." Bob Jessup, Catherine's father, said, "It breaks my heart. If I could, I would line him up and blow his brains out. He must have been so sick. I am happy to now know who it was, but I doubt I will be able to sleep." When the police visited Guy Paul Morin to apologize for his wrongful conviction and to give him the news of who killed Christine Jessup, he said, "I can say that I'm happy that there's closure for the Jessup's peace of mind. The something I was always expecting. The justice system failed me, but science saved me." Morin said he felt relief that his name can now be definitively cleared. Friends and family remembered Christine Jessup as a level-headed, well-behaved child who was special in every way. She was a girl who loved life, her family, school, and sports. When thinking about what makes somewhere a great place to live, we often consider the safety, the community, the friendliness of the locals, and there is one country that ticks all the boxes. Located off the east coast of Greenland, Iceland has been consistently voted one of the best countries in the world to live in. With a population of just over 340,000, one of the world's smallest, its breathtaking natural beauty packs a big punch. Natural springs and rolling hills attract tourists from all over the world. People travel from far and wide to experience the riches this small country has to offer, from the incredible architecture to the phenomenon of the aurora borealis. Harsh winters mean sunlight can be scarce, but this merely adds to the intrigue of Iceland, a place so far removed from what most of us know and understand. One of the most appealing things about Iceland is the friendliness, openness, and kindness of its people. Due to the tough terrain and harsh winters, people rely on each other, value community, and take care of their neighbors. There are strong social attitudes against crime. They have no army. Police officers do not carry guns. People often leave their doors unlocked and get lifts with strangers. One Friday night in February 2017, the peace and tranquility of Iceland would be shattered, and the nation would be left reeling by a seemingly random, motiveless, and brutal murder. This is the story of Berna Bronsdottir. Berna Bronsdottir lived in the southeast of Reykjavik. While her parents were no longer together, they remained on friendly terms, and she was the center of their world. She was bright and spirited, with her fiery personality reflected in her striking auburn hair. She was incredibly witty with a sharp sense of humor, which made her popular amongst her friends. She was carefree and whimsical, but always responsible, with this maturity reflected in her relationship with her family and her mature attitude to work. Music was a big passion, and Berna wasn't picky. She would listen to anything from rap to pop and from rock to folk. It was this openness and free spirit that made so many people love her. Berna had a close-knit circle of friends and would enjoy the nightlife of Reykjavik. She worked in the fashion section of a busy department store and would unwind after work by going to the local bar for drinks, before heading out to really let her hair down. And on the January 13th, 2017, this is exactly what Berna did. That night, she closed up the shop and went for drinks and a few rounds of cards before heading into the center of the capital for a night of laughing, drinking, and dancing. They went to Hura, where the up-and-coming bands would play, and before long, Berna was dancing on the stage. Her friends were ready to leave by 2 a.m., but Berna wasn't. She wanted to carry on enjoying herself, whether before heading for a falafel and walking in the direction of her home. A woman walking alone in Reykjavik was not rare. People trusted each other and looked out for each other. Due to her intoxication, she dropped coins and stumbled into a stranger on the side of the road. As she carried on walking, she turned a corner and walked down a narrow lane towards the sea. Then she vanished. Her punctual reputation meant that when she failed to turn up for work, people were immediately concerned. One of her friends from school, Maria, who worked with Berna, was instantly unsettled by her absence. This was only made worse when she tried to call her mobile. It wouldn't connect, and Berna never turned off her phone. People suspected she had just gone back to her father's house to nurse her hangover. This is also what her friends thought who had been out with her that night, but she wasn't there. Berna's mother, Silla, was called, and she too was concerned over her daughter's whereabouts. She knew Berna, and she knew this was out of character. Her family wasted no time. They went straight to the police and reported her missing. Realizing the power of social media, Silla posted to her Facebook page, "Dear friends, it's not like her that we can't reach her. Please share and let's find her." Silla. Iceland is a small community, and before long, Silla's desperate pleas on Facebook were being shared, and news of Berna's disappearance began to circulate. The stress and worry of having a child go missing is unimaginable. Her parents couldn't sleep. They persistently made calls to all the emergency services, desperately seeking any new information on Berna's whereabouts. The following day, the police were able to trace her last known mobile interaction. Before it went dead, or was turned off just before 6 a.m., her phone pinged off a mobile tower in a port town, Hafnarfjordur, 6 miles outside of the capital. Silla wasted no time and drove there, calling out to her daughter and searching the area. She was helped by a team of family and friends who were determined to bring Berna home. Before long, 36 hours had passed since Berna had disappeared into the Reykjavik night. Her family and friends were adamant that something terrible had happened to her. She was a reliable young woman, and this was completely out of character. The police, however, had little to go on. They had no evidence of a murder or abduction, so there was not much they could do. As news of her disappearance carried on spreading, it quickly became headline news. Berna's face was plastered over newspapers, and her name was in the mouth of every news anchor in Iceland. In the early hours of Sunday morning, her parents went to the police and begged them to search for her. They said she would not have gone off of her own accord, much less not told anyone where she was going. She had no money troubles or relationship problems. Everyone who knew Berna adored her. A case as baffling and unusual as this required Iceland's best detectives, one of which was Grimald Grimsson. He had 30 years of investigative experience. He was even part of a special team who spent more than 5 years building a case against those whose misconduct and corruption contributed to the financial crash of 2009. After this, he returned to his roots as a police officer, saying he missed the fast-paced work. Like his colleagues, he too wasn't initially that concerned about Berna. There were many other factors that he had to consider. People do go missing in Iceland. Anything from mental health problems to simply staying at a friend's house and not CCTV. But Reykjavik isn't like most capital cities. The Icelandic population have negative attitudes towards clothes, and CCTV showed her leaving the club, dropping her coins, and walking into the stranger. When Grimson checked the next camera less than a block away, she was gone. There were two options. Either she had gone down the side road off the corner or got into a car. Grimson had a keen eye for detail and was sure that there was a clue in that grainy CCTV that would eventually lead them to Berner. He noticed a car, a red Kia Rio, going on the opposite side of the road to Berner. He watched as it drove past the Lebowski bar seconds after Berner had been seen there. This was a lead the officers had to pursue. Then came the next problem. They couldn't make out the license plate, who was driving, or how many were in the car. There were more than 100 cars of that make and model in Iceland. This did nothing to calm the fears of her parents. Scylla was incandescent when they explained. The quality of the tape was too poor to extract any more details from. Scylla said, "Can't you find it like in the movies?" Grimson replied, "It doesn't work like that." The police knew that while they didn't have enough in terms of CCTV, they did have a community with a spirit of hope. They appealed to the people of Iceland for their help. They held a rare press conference. Grimson and Berna's distraught family went before the cameras and begged Iceland for its assistance in finding her. Scylla showed the media what kind of person her daughter was, explaining she was extremely intelligent, bilingual, with a love of other cultures, and a passion for exploring. The police hunch that the press conference would lead to a breakthrough proved right, and before long they had their first lead. A pair of brothers decided to search Hafnarfjordur, where her phone had pinged off of the tower, and when there, they headed towards the harbor. After searching in a fenced-off area, they found a pair of boots, black Doc Martens, identical to the pair that Berna had last been seen wearing. Using the power of social media, they posted a picture of them to Facebook, and before long, the officers arrived. They confirmed the shoes were Berner's. Finally, the police felt like they were getting somewhere. Grimson demanded officers scour through the CCTV with a fine-tooth comb, and soon they saw a familiar picture. At 6 a.m. on the morning Berner vanished, a red Kia Rio pulled into the harbor. A man climbed out of the car and staggered off in a drunken state towards a fishing trawler that had docked there. 25-year-old fisherman from Greenland, Thomas Muller Olsen. The car had since been rented by a family who complained of a stench of chemicals coming from the back. After impounding the car, officers were determined to find any trace of Berner, and soon they had a clue: blood spots in the back seat. Samples were quickly gathered and sent off to Sweden for analysis in a desperate bid to see if it matched Berner. For Grimson and his team, it was now a race against time. They needed to find the trawler and their only suspects, Thomas Muller Olsen and Nikolai Olsen. Thomas and Nikolai weren't related, but were crewmates on the trawler. Thomas was considered easygoing, approachable, and generally likable. Whilst on board, his phone pinged. Thomas went pale. It was a news article saying that the ship he was on was linked to the disappearance of Berna. A journalist had contacted a Facebook group used by the men on board and asked who had rented the car and who was seen on the CCTV. Thomas was visibly shaken. His captain assured him that if he was innocent, he would be fine. The challenge for Grimson and his team was huge. The longer his suspects were on that boat, the longer they had to align their stories and get rid of anything incriminating. He needn't have worried because the ship's captain had already formed a plan. He had read of the link between the ship and Berner, so turned it around and headed back towards Iceland. He and his high-ranking officers agreed they would say engine problems had forced the turnaround, and the Wi-Fi was disabled so that the suspects could not read anything about the case. The police were keen to use the elements of surprise, and so used members of their elite counterterrorism squad, also known as the Viking Squad, to board the ship as soon as it came back into Icelandic territory. Officers were dropped onto the ship from a helicopter, and finally, the police had their two suspects in custody. The reaction of the public to the case was massive, and the whole country was waiting on tenterhooks for any news of what had happened to Berna. The case seemed to take over all aspects of Icelandic life. Although their intentions were good, online sleuths only added to the confusion, and it became hard to distinguish rumor from fact. Stories ranged from a body being found in a lake, to Berna and other women being found alive on the trawler, swirled around social media. Grimson remained calm and called for the same. However well-intentioned people were, it wasn't helping in the search for Berna. At around 11 p.m. on Wednesday night, the ship came back into port, and the two suspects were brought back onto Icelandic soil in handcuffs. Then came the news that nobody wanted to hear. The blood in the rental car was Berna's. The police wasted no time in questioning the two men. Nikolai and Thomas were sure that they had done nothing to Berna and gave similar accounts of the events of that fateful night. They had both separated and gone to different drinking spots before meeting up again as the night began to wind down. Nikolai was already incredibly drunk, and his account was hazy. Although Nikolai could remember nothing about them, they said they had picked up two girls on the high street, one of which was Berna. Thomas said he'd dropped Nikolai off at the ship before driving away. He then climbed into the back with the two girls where they kissed before he dropped them off an hour later. The police were inclined to believe Nikolai. He had been seen walking away and was clearly in no fit state to do anything. However, when it came to Thomas, they had a bad feeling, and the evidence against him was stacking up. He was examined by a doctor who determined the wounds on his chest were signs of a struggle or fight. When searching the ship, the police found a driver's license in the bin. It belonged to Berna. They also found drugs with a street value of nearly £1.5 million. He claimed to have slept in the car, but the police checked the odometer, which showed that the car had been taken for a long drive. CCTV would prove to be their friend also, as he was seen in a shop, buying plastic bags and cleaning fluid before scrubbing the inside of the car. Police didn't believe his excuse, that he had been sick and was simply trying to clean it. They knew the blood spots in the car were Berna's, and when they used luminol to highlight any blood not seen with the naked eye, the back of the car lit up. It was absolutely covered in blood. For days after she vanished, Iceland launched the biggest search in its history. The search and rescue project manager said, "Today, she is our sister, our daughter." That became the mantra. We don't live in a society where we tolerate a 20-year-old woman being abducted in the night. It wouldn't be long before the police found what they were looking for. A Coast Guard helicopter noticed something floating in the water near a local lighthouse. It was a body. They had found Berna. And with this announcement, Iceland plunged into mourning. The shock and disbelief was palpable. This was the kind of thing that happened in movies and other countries. It didn't happen in Iceland. Citizens of Greenland were also appalled and grieved alongside their Nordic neighbor. The high street in Reykjavik from which Berna had disappeared became a shrine, lit up by candles. Berna's funeral was held at the biggest church in the country, the Hallgrímskirkja, and over 2,000 people attended, including the president and the prime minister. The public wanted answers, and the police needed to provide them. First, they had to ascertain the cause of death. Berna had been found naked, but they could find no evidence of a sexual assault. The examiner found that she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head and had been strangled as well. However, the official cause of death was ruled as drowning. She had survived the initial attack and was alive when she was put into the water. Grimson and his team examined the evidence in front of them. They could find no link between Berna's murder and Nikolai, and they did not believe he was involved. After 2 weeks in custody and hours of interrogation, he was freed. Their attention now turned back to Thomas. His story remained the same, and he wasn't changing it. Over the course of 9 interviews with police, he maintained his innocence. While the police had their crime scene and suspect, they could find no reason or motive as to why Thomas would murder Berna, but the evidence continued to mount. They'd been able to find his DNA on a lace of Berna's Doc Martens, and his fingerprints were found on her discarded driving license. On the March 30th, 2017, breaking it was during his trial that he sensationally changed his story. He said that there were not 2 girls, only one Berna. He said that he had left the car to go to the bathroom, and Nikolai had driven off with Berna in the back seat. And when he returned, she wasn't with him. Court was stunned. He was now trying to pin the murder on his crewmate. With a low voice and a face covered, he admitted to the drug possession, but denied murder. In September, the 3 judges had reached their verdict. Guilty on all counts. and he was led away to begin his 19-year prison sentence. Thomas Muller Olson has appealed his conviction, but the High Court upheld it. And the following year, the High Court refused to consider another appeal. The murder of Berna Bronsdottir was a crime that shook Iceland. The chaplain who presided over Berna's funeral said, "This case will be remembered. It changed us a bit, our feeling of security." CCTV around Reykjavik was increased, and women became more wary of strangers. For Grim or Grimson, despite 30 years of service, this had been his first murder case. His calm and coordinated approach made him a hero in Iceland. He now proudly represents his country in the European Union's Agency for Law Enforcement Cooperation based in The Hague. Despite the tragic events surrounding the murder of Berna, her memory continues to be kept alive, and the people of Iceland are determined that she will never be forgotten. Rita Curran was born on June 21, 1947 in Brooklyn, Kings County, New York, to Thomas and Mary Curran. She was described as a kind, generous, and beautiful person who wouldn't do anyone any harm. When Rita Curran turned 24 years old, in the summer of 1971, she decided to move out of her parents' home for the first time, into a shared apartment on Brooks Avenue in Burlington, Vermont, with 3 other roommates whom she did not know well. At the time, she was a second-grade teacher at Milton Elementary School and had started graduate courses at the University of Vermont, while she worked during the summer break as a maid at a local motel. Unfortunately, just 2 weeks after she left her family's house, she was murdered in her apartment in Burlington, Vermont. According to police report, she seemed ready for bed the night she was attacked, as she was found dead with curlers in her hair. Many people know Burlington to be a small and friendly city, but when Rita Curran was killed, it caused ripples of fear in the city because at that time, many Burlington residents left their front doors unlocked. This could explain why Rita Curran's apartment door might not be locked at the time of her murder, since the police did not discover any visible force used on the entrance door. During the investigation, police officers collected evidence from the crime scene that included a single cigarette found near Rita Curran's arm, which was believed the killer left to burn out. They also interviewed Rita Curran's neighbors and investigated hundreds of tips. Among the neighbors interrogated were a newly wedded couple, Williams and Michelle DeRouse, who lived in an apartment 2 floors above Rita Curran's at the time of her murder. They, however, told investigators that they had been together all night and didn't hear or see anything. The police had a list of 13 suspects, in which Ted Bundy was one of them. It appeared that the location of the local motel where Rita Curran worked was adjacent to serial killer Ted Bundy's birthplace, the Elizabeth Lund Home for Unwed Mothers. Rita Curran's murder and crime scene was similar to how Ted Bundy attacked his victims, and this led retired FBI agent John Bassett to propose him as a suspect at the time. In order to find closure and to ask if truly he killed Rita Curran, Mary Campbell Curran, Rita Curran's sister, wrote a letter to Florida's death row where Ted Bundy was being held. In response, the FBI told her that Ted Bundy had refused to confirm or deny his involvement in Curran's death, and there was no evidence that firmly placed him in Burlington on that date of the murder. However, Detective Robert D. Keppel interviewed Ted Bundy, who later told him that he had murdered a young woman in 1971 in Burlington when he was there to obtain information about his birth. But on January 22, 1989, the eve of his execution, Ted Bundy denied his involvement in Rita Curran's case to FBI Special Agent William Hagmeyer. Having exhausted all leads, and without an improved DNA technology to pinpoint a suspect, the case went cold for over 4 decades. According to Burlington's acting police chief, John Murad, the department never stopped seeking justice for Rita Curran's family. In 2014, the Burlington's police department sent all the evidence collected at the crime scene, including the cigarette, to a forensic lab in New York City for DNA testing. Though the tests compiled a DNA profile of the person who had smoked the cigarette, it didn't match any DNA in databases compiled by law enforcement agencies across the country. That meant the person with the DNA on the cigarette but likely never had genetic material entered into the database, possibly because the person didn't have a felony conviction. The DNA testing also didn't match the known DNA of any of the police's 13 main suspects. However, in February 2019, Detective Lieutenant James Trebb decided to try a new approach to the case. Instead of having a single detective work on the case alone, per the usual department strategy, Lieutenant Trebb decided to bring in a new team of detectives and expert technicians who discussed and reviewed the Rita Kearns case. This team treated the case as if it had just been committed. They began retesting evidence by sending the cigarette for DNA analysis again, but this time, they used genetic genealogy, which is a process that uses DNA databases for genealogy research to identify possible family members of the person whose DNA is unmatched. After the DNA analysis, the genetic genealogy expert concluded that the cigarette DNA had strong connections to relatives of William Dyrus, the man who lived 2 floors above Rita Kearns' apartment in 1971, who had been questioned alongside his wife by detectives and claimed to have been in his home during the time of the murder. The investigators then searched and found a living half-brother of Williams Dyrus who willingly provided a DNA sample. After the test, it was however concluded that the cigarette DNA belonged to Williams Dyrus. In 2022, more evidence at the crime scene, including Rita Kearns' ripped housecoat, were sent to a crime lab in Florida where they performed new DNA extracting techniques. Before then, the detectives had sent the genetic evidence from the cigarette to a genealogy company to see if a bigger database of DNA could help them pinpoint the killer. The scientist and genealogy expert was able to match the DNA from the cigarette to William Dyrus within hours of research through genealogical records and public records. Also, finally, the DNA left on Rita Kearns' ripped housecoat also matched the DNA on the cigarette butt. The investigators later discovered that William Dyrus died at age 46 in 1986 at a San Francisco hotel from a drug overdose. Shortly after Rita Kearns' murder, he and his wife left Vermont and got divorced. In an interview with the police, William Dyrus' ex-wife, Michelle, who had moved to Eugene, Oregon, and had changed her name, told investigators she had lied in 1971 about her husband being with her all night in their apartment. It was established that William Dyrus had gotten into an argument with his wife on the evening of July 19, 1971, and had gone out for a walk to supposedly cool off. He returned later that night and told his wife the next morning to tell the police investigating Rita Kearns' death that he had never left their apartment, warning her that his past criminal record might unfairly make him Detective Thomas Chenette, who interviewed Michelle, said he didn't believe she knew William Dyrus had killed Kearns, but was protecting him because they were newly married and obviously in love, and he had a criminal record. After their divorce, William Dyrus moved to Thailand and became a monk. He then came back to San Francisco, United States in 1974, where he met his second wife, Sarah Hepting. Sarah Hepting said in an interview with Burlington Police that William Dyrus had a penchant for sudden outbursts of violence. She said there were 2 instances where he had been extremely violent around her. One of which was when they both were having a conversation with a female friend and he had taken a pocket knife and stabbed the woman in her abdomen for no reason whatsoever. He was arrested, but the woman did not press charges. Dyrus later told Hepting that he thought it was her he stabbed. Sarah Hepting said the second instance of Dyrus violence was when he suddenly started to strangle her for no reason when they were having dinner. She said that was the last straw and the reason she left him. After Rita Kearns' case was declared solved, even though her parents unfortunately died without knowing her killer, her living family and friends remembered her and were glad that they finally have closure. Jim Rebar, Rita Kearns' second-grade student, remembered her as a kind and beautiful person. He said, "We actually did a play the year that I had her. I forgot what the play was about, but I was a dancing clown holding a teddy bear. She told me that I could keep the teddy bear, and I still have the teddy bear, I just can't find it." Her sister, Mary Kern Campbell, said, "We now have 2 generations in our family who never knew her." Tom Curran, her brother, said, "I don't think so much about the guy who did this as I do about Rita and my parents and what they went through. I pray to my parents and I pray to Rita." Closing the case, Lieutenant Treby said, "We're all confident that William Dyrus is responsible for the aggravated murder of Rita Kearns. But because he died in a hotel room of a drug overdose, he will not be held accountable for his actions, but this case will be closed." Around 6:30 a.m. on January 18, 1981 in Camarillo, California, about 50 miles from Los Angeles, 2 newspaper delivery boys discovered the naked body of 20-year-old Rachel Zendejas, an Oxnard college student and a single mom of 2 who had recently gone through a divorce. She was murdered in an apartment complex's carport just across the street from her apartment in 700 block of Mobile Avenue, which she shared with her brother and 2 daughters, who were 1 and 2 years old at the time of her murder. The police got to the crime scene and retrieved evidence. During the investigation, detectives learned that Rachel Zendeges had gone out the evening before her murder to hire a couple of babysitters to stay with her girls. She then went out that evening and came back home the following morning, after which she dropped off the babysitters. Her killer was believed to have attacked her as she got out of her vehicle after returning home from dropping off the babysitters. Her case was investigated for several years until all leads were exhausted and the case eventually became cold. However, before the end of the year, in the early hours of December 12, 1981, a neighbor called the police to report a fire outbreak at an apartment in Oxnard. Members of the Oxnard Fire Department rushed to the scene and extinguished the fire. When done, they discovered the naked body of 21 years old Lisa Gondex in the bathtub of the apartment. Her killer had raped her, strangled her, and then set the apartment on fire. Her neighbors heard screams but did not call 911 until they smelled smoke. Lisa Gondex was a retail worker living in Oxnard, about 10 miles west of Camarillo, and she had attended a club at the Port Hueneme Naval Base on the night of December 11, 1981. She went to a disco with her friends, after which her friends later dropped her off at her home at around 1:30 a.m. the following day. She was discovered dead in her bathtub, and her killer was unknown for decades. Lisa Gondex was said to have been on a visit to Oxnard from Connecticut for a planned 2-week trip to visit a friend in the U.S. Navy. However, she ultimately decided to move to Oxnard months before she was murdered. She had made a promise to her loved ones to spend the Christmas with them. In her words, she said, "Mom, I'll be home for Christmas." Lisa Gondex had moved in with a childhood best friend and got a job at a teen clothing store in the Esplanade Shopping Center in Oxnard. Being new to the area didn't stop her from quickly making new friends. According to her roommate, Lisa Gondex was a kind person and beautiful in and out. In her words, she said, "If Lisa had $1, she would split it with you." Rachel Zendejas and Lisa Gondex cases were separately investigated from each other until in 2002, when the suspect's DNA from Rachel Zendejas' crime scene was sent to the FBI's combined DNA index system. A search was conducted on the criminal database for felons in order to pinpoint the killer, but it yielded no results. However, 23 years after the murder, in 2004, the investigators working on Lisa Gondex's case utilized DNA testing and later informed the Ventura County Sheriff's Office that they had linked both Rachel Zendejas and Lisa Gondex homicides cases to a single suspect. The DNA, however, did not return any results that could put a face to the suspect, and the case went cold again. Another stunning connection about both women going to a nightclub called Huntington in the hours before their deaths was established. The club, now closed, was a hot spot across from the Esplanade Mall. In December 2019, Ventura County's cold case unit took over the cases again and applied genetic genealogy, an advanced DNA testing that is used to identify possible relatives to the suspects. The investigation then provided new leads, and further DNA testing confirmed that Tony Garcia was the suspect in both homicides. Tony Garcia resided in Oxnard at the time of his arrest in February 7, 2023. He had been right under the noses of the detectives for over 4 decades. He was born in Roswell, New Mexico, but was enlisted in the U.S. Navy and stationed at Point Mugu near Oxnard. Tony Garcia was, however, discharged from service in 1980 but remained in Oxnard, where he became a karate student and instructor for many years. He was working as a carpenter at the time of his arrest. It is not known if Tony Garcia knew any of his victims. Tony Garcia was charged with 2 counts of murder, plus special allegations of committing murder while engaged in a rape and committing murder while engaged in a kidnapping. At his first appearance in court, he was ordered to be held without bail. Following Tony Garcia's arrest, Rachel Zendejas' brother, Roy Rodriguez, said, "I am alive for this. It is my purpose to get this thing solved for Rachel." Los Angeles, California is one of the most famous places in the world. Home to the rich and famous and the epitome of glamour, people travel from all over the globe in their bid for fame and fortune. It's the place where dreams come true and where anything is possible. However, under the surface lies a dark underbelly of crime, and throughout the 1960s and 70s, women began to disappear, and in frighteningly similar circumstances. Some would turn up dead, others would never be seen again. Today, we're looking at the disappearance of Robin Graham and California's missing women. Robin Graham was born on the 22nd of June, 1952. Growing up in Echo Park, Los Angeles, she lived with her parents, Marvin and Beverly. She was a small girl, around 5'6", weighing 125 pounds, but she had a big personality and an even bigger heart. She was a bright student and graduated from John Marshall High School, and this hard work continued as she began attending Pierce College as well as working at Pier 1 Imports in Hollywood. Along with balancing work and school, she was in a loving relationship and had a busy social life. On the 14th of November, 1970, Robin left her car at Pier 1 Imports and got a lift with her boyfriend as she headed for a night out. After a night of laughter and dancing, she got a lift back to the car and set off driving down the Hollywood freeway at around 2 o'clock in the morning. Just minutes into her journey, her car stalled near the Santa Monica Boulevard off-ramp. Seconds after pulling to the side of the road, California Highway Patrol officers came to her aid. They offered to call the stranded Robin a tow truck. However, she politely declined and instead used a phone box to call home. Her sister passed the message on to her parents, and they said they would be there as soon as possible. The patrol officers decided to loop around and double-check on her. She was back at her car and told them that she had contacted home and was waiting for her lift. Happy she would soon be off the freeway, the officers carried on driving. Upon their third time of driving past Robin, they saw a light blue Corvette parked behind her car, and she was talking to a man. He was around 5'8" in his 20s with bell-bottom trousers and a turtleneck. The patrolman saw the two ride off in his car together and said she appeared to go willingly, believing she was now safely with her family. They continued on their way. Around half an hour after her car broke down, her family arrived. Her Dodge was locked and she had gone. Investigators were stumped. Once a car had disappeared into the busy Los Angeles traffic, the chances of finding it again were slim. Initial reports said that Robin had willingly gotten the car with the man. However, the officer who made that report was questioned again and said that while he saw them talking, he didn't see them leave together. The California Highway Patrol faced an immediate backlash for their conduct on the night Robin vanished. People were outraged that they had left a teenage girl on the highway in the company of a strange man in the middle of the night. Even the Los Angeles County Supervisor agreed with the criticism, but the officers in question were determined to have acted in accordance with procedure when dealing with stranded drivers. After the uproar, the policy was changed to ensure that no woman stranded on the highway would be left alone. The disappearance was investigated by the Rampart Division of the LAPD, and alarm bells were ringing for officers. A couple of years before Robin went missing, numerous women were attacked in what would later be dubbed the Good Samaritan attacks. The suspect would follow the same pattern. He would follow their car and begin flashing his headlights. When they pulled over, he would approach them, saying he noticed a problem with the back tires, and when they were off guard, he would attack them. The police told members of the public to be wary of people posing as Good Samaritans and told them not to pull over if they were signaled to by a stranger. After the attacks, the perpetrator seemingly vanished. The more the police investigated, the more disturbing similarities they found to previously unsolved cases. Around a year before Robin's disappearance, an Israeli-born student named Rose Tashman was driving down the Hollywood freeway when her car got a flat tire. Police found her car abandoned, and her body would later be discovered, strangled, and dumped in the Hollywood Hills. A few months after Rose Tashman, another woman, Cindy Lee Mellon, disappeared. She too had a flat tire. Her father said she would not have known how to change one. Colleagues said they had seen her talking with a man who they assumed was her father. After realizing Cindy hadn't been seen, her father drove to the Buena Ventura shopping center where she'd worked. The spare tire was on the ground nearby, and her car had the trunk, doors, and glove box open. One of her tires had been slashed with a knife. Cindy Lee Mellon was never seen again. Women in California just kept disappearing. and police had no real answers. In 1971, Lisa Smith vanished while hitchhiking in Santa Rosa on Hearn Avenue. She was only 17 years old at the time of her disappearance. The following year, Ernestine Torello ended up with a flat tire on the Ventura Freeway. Her body was later found in the Santa Monica Mountains. The police believed that she had been killed by someone who pulled over using the facade of helping her with her tire. Just 5 days after Ernestine Torello was last seen, 20-year-old Jeanette Kamahali was seen hitchhiking in Santa Rosa on Highway 101. A friend of Jeanette was heading to pick her up. Before they could make it to her, she was seen with a white man in his 20s and, like all the other women, was never seen alive again. Mona Jean Gallegos left her friend's house at around 1 a.m. On June 19, 1975, her car was found abandoned on the San Bernardino Freeway at Santa Anita Avenue at 4:45 that morning. It was locked up with no gas. The police theorized she had gone to a nearby gas station and been offered a lift by someone there. 6 months later, her remains were found in the Riverside Ravine. The Times ran an article by Robert Kitzler, which said that detectives believed her disappearance was identical to that of Robin Graham's. There are a few theories surrounding the disappearance of Robin Graham. After news of her disappearance broke, the Los Angeles Times covered the story. This would lead them to their first proper witness. A woman came forward saying that she had stalled on the Hollywood freeway, just like Robin had. She was approached by a man in a Corvette. He claimed to be an off-duty police officer and suggested that she catch a ride with him. After she refused, he quickly sped off into the night. 1 month later, she was able to identify him, a man called Bruce Davis. A look at Bruce Davis's history paints a frightening picture. He had been a high-profile member of the notorious Manson family cult, responsible for a string of infamous murders that sent Los Angeles into a tailspin of fear and still captures the attention of the public all these years later. Although he wasn't involved in the cult's most notorious crime, the Tate LaBianca murders, he was right-hand man to its leader, Charles Manson. Davis was later convicted of 2 murders, both connected to the Manson family. He is also a suspect in several disappearances and unsolved murders in California, including the brutal and frenzied murder of a couple in Silver Lake, not far from Los Angeles. Both victims have been stabbed at least 40 times with ferocity and fury. This potential link to Bruce Davis forced the investigators to examine another frightening possibility that maybe Robin Graham had fallen victim to the Zodiac Killer. Bruce Davis was one of those suspected of being the notorious unknown criminal. The Zodiac's first known attack was in Northern California in 1968, and he has 5 confirmed victims, but there could be many more. He would strike at random in motiveless and brutal attacks that would leave California paralyzed, not knowing who would be next. It's worth noting that Robin went missing on a full moon, which was one of the signatures of the Zodiac. He would taunt the police with cryptic letters and relish the attention given to him by the media. However close the police thought they were to catching him, he was always one step ahead. This potential link to the Zodiac took the police back to the previously unsolved Good Samaritan attacks. Kathleen Johns was driving to San Francisco with her young child 8 months before Robin Graham's disappearance. A car came up behind her and began to flash the headlights. After pulling over, a man got out of the car and said that her back wheel was wobbling and offered to fix it for her. Instead, he loosened it, and as she tried to drive away, it completely came off. He offered to take her to a local gas station, and thinking her and her child would be safe, she accepted. He approached the gas station and slowly drove past it. She nervously asked where they were going, and he replied, "Before I kill you, I'm gonna throw your baby out the window." He continued driving for an hour and a half, telling her, "You're gonna die." She managed to escape with her child and hid in a field, but he did not give up easily. He scoured the area with a torch, determined to hunt her down. He only left when he heard the sound of a nearby truck approaching. She managed to flag down a car who drove her to the safety of a police station. As she sat and waited to make her report, she looked up to a poster on the wall. On it was the face of the man who had terrorized her and threatened the life of her and her child. It was a wanted poster for the Zodiac Killer. Robin Graham's parents never lost hope. They remained at the same house with the same phone number, waiting for their beloved daughter to return home. But tragically to date, no trace of Robin Graham has ever been found. To think that these women fell victim to a supposed Good Samaritan under the guise of being helped when they were at their most vulnerable is a truly terrifying thought. And sadly, the true fate of California's missing women will most likely remain a mystery. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.